Describe new forms of entertainment that emerged in the 1920s. Within your response, detail key figures, forms of technology, and new trends that changed American culture. Charlie Chaplin just wasn't doing it for some of you, I guess. Oh, that was fun. Minor current events, Sarah and Matt, for Thursday. So we don't have school Friday. So make sure you have those ready to go for Thursday. Bless you. Bless you. All right. So, what do we have here? Describe new forms of entertainment that emerged in the 1920s. What do we have? What do we got? Gabe, what do you have?
uh, new forms of entertainment. Is that the one you want?
Yeah.
Magazines and radios and like going to watch sports and stuff.
Okay. All right. So, magazines, radios. So, how did radios really revolutionize the way communication and forms of entertainment were used in the 1920s?
I'm pretty sure they use the radio to like hear the president's speeches and then news to get across easier and faster.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So this is a streamline of information, the first time we ever have this in history. And we'll get to it with fireside chats in the 1930s through the Great Depression and how Franklin Roosevelt reached out to the American public about how he's trying to help and benefit society, the United States, through the Great Depression. So yeah, good job. So the radio with political means, also entertainment. So different types of shows, sports, and really just staying informed with current events of the news. Obviously, the radio was used as a way to receive information, and it was fast, obviously efficient, and still today we use the radio, obviously. All right, good, 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 good. Then you said magazines, newspapers, right? So magazines and newspapers, yeah, they weren't a new thing, but the way that magazines were utilized for like Reader's Digest, Time, okay, these companies are starting to emerge in the 1920s to keep informed the American public, right? And obviously have information in there like entertainment that's really never seen before until the 1920s. A lot of that has to do with the emergence of grocery stores, emergence of these new entertainment facilities and institutions where these magazines can be prevalent and seen all over. Okay, good. So subscriptions to to magazines like Sports Illustrated eventually will be created. Different things like that to keep the people well informed of what they're interested in. All right, what else? What else? What about key figures in the 1920s that we talked about? Cassidy, who do you talk about? Yeah, good job. So Babe Ruth, why was he famous? Yeah, the baseball star, right? Yep, for the New York Yankees. He was larger than life, and many people knew who Babe Ruth was. And it was to a point where he was even a bigger star than many politicians, even the president in many cases. When he went to Chicago, like I said, Al Capone and him used to hang out. And it just shows how much of an impact entertainment, like sports, baseball, our pastime, has on the American people and our culture. Right. So Babe Ruth, larger than life because of obviously baseball and hitting home runs and just a huge star at the time. All right, good. And then you said Charles Lindbergh, right? Who's Charles Lindbergh? Griffin, who is Charles Lindbergh? Guy that flew the airplane. Okay. So what feat did he accomplish? Yeah, good job. So nonstop trip across the Atlantic Ocean. What was his plane? What was the name of his plane? Term yesterday. Spirit of St. Louis. Good, good job. So, like I mentioned yesterday, early 1900s, a plane was just being introduced. It was just being created. Right, 1904, the first flight. It was really just a glide, right, in the Outer Banks. But now, just not even 20 years later, thanks to World War One, obviously, the plane is being utilized to travel far distances, like across the Atlantic Ocean. And this was an amazing feat that no one's ever accomplished before. So Charles Lindbergh, doing this, made a name for himself. And he was really one of the most famous people, not only in our country, but the whole world, because these planes are being utilized for amazing feats now. And this is just showing how much the plane has progressed in such a short time frame. Literally just 20 years, it's already being traveled across the Atlantic Ocean. And like I said yesterday with Lindbergh, it was an unfortunate story with his child being taken from the home and held for ransom. And unfortunate, but he died. He was killed. They said he was stricken on top of the head and buried in a somewhat of a grave. And it was just a sad, sad story. But it just shows how big of a name he really was, and that people were trying to make money off of him, unfortunately. All right, last one. Charlie Chaplin, who we talked about. Who is Charlie Chaplin? We just watched a skit of him. Jamie? A comedian. Yep, good job. When silent films were paramount, right? Before the talkies, before films had words in it. Okay, he was acting like his character is called the Tramp. He acted like he was getting in these weird predicaments, these weird situations, oftentimes acting drunk and kind of stumbling over himself and into many different conflicts. But Chaplin was famous for his comedic strip skits, and he would perform a lot of these in many stages across the country, and obviously in these films. Later, he will adapt his films where he would talk, but his character is based solely off of silent films and not really talking at all. All right, so Charlie Chaplin, again, a person that's larger than life, and he was knighted. He was knighted, which I think is pretty neat to think about, and shows how big entertainment is in the Western world. All right, is there any other questions we might have here on entertainment? I want to talk about Steamboat Willie today. I'll show that at the end of class. And I want to talk about writers of the 1920s, then what they're writing about, what they're discussing in their articles, their books, you name it. All right, so terms for today. We got Sinclair Lewis, The Babbitt, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, Ernest Hemingway, and his two work, The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms. All right, there we go. Do you need more time? All right, one more minute. One more minute. All right, so we're going to talk about these writers today of the 1920s and their forms of work, what they were talking about, and explaining in this new cultural change in the United States. First, just want to talk about Steamboat Willie. So, Steamboat Willie was the introduction, really, of first animated films, and it was something that was overall changing our forms of entertainment. Okay, so animated films is being first introduced in the 1920s by Walt Disney, and Steamboat Willie was it. And I'm sure many of you maybe already seen the clip. I'll show it here towards the end of class, but we have a little bit of time left. But this was something, again, people go to movie theaters in their local areas or local towns to watch these short skits. And it was something, obviously, people did. It was a form of entertainment. The Jazz Singer, 1927, was the first movie with sound. They called them talkies, right? And Charlie Chaplin, he was obviously a silent film star. So this was something that was going to clash with the silent films of the 1920s. And many of these stars, like Chaplin, they weren't for these talkies. They weren't, they thought it kind of took a little bit away of the acting scene on the stage, where you need to act out your emotions, act out the way you performed on the stage. So talkies obviously were something in the 1920s, moving to 1930s, that people went to see. And The Jazz Singer was the first movie that had words in it. It really wasn't anything long. It was, I think, just really a sentence, and it just talked a little bit about the music that was being played in the skit, in the movie. Jazz, we'll talk about it, is the music of the era. And we'll mention that more when we get to the Harlem Renaissance towards the end of the chapter here. So by 1930, millions of Americans went to the movies each week. So movies were becoming prevalent in American society. All right, music and art. Music and art. So jazz was applied to literally everything. Okay, and almost every short skit, they would play some sort of, some form of jazz. And it kind of explained a little bit about the time era itself. And because that was popular at the time of the 1920s, it's like rock or rap or pop, I guess, today. I don't even know what is the popular genre today. Is it rap, Griffin? Is it? Oh my gosh, man. All right. But there's many eras that you can look at and think about genres of music at that time. And I guess the 80s, Miss O'Neill, was it hair bands, hard rock. Yeah, 90s more of an alternative. 2000s maybe a punk rock. And now it's like pop and hip hop, rap, stuff like that. But in the 1920s, jazz was huge. All right, so paintings like Edward Hopper depicted the loneliness of American life. So as we're transitioning, and especially in these larger areas, these urban areas, these cities look lonely, especially at night. Okay. And he depicted many scenes in these urban areas where people maybe just didn't hang out, right? Or maybe just looked at the differences of society, especially in these urban areas. And it just kind of showed a dark, gloomy city. And the reason he did that was because the 1920s brought so much change, right? So much change, especially with the emergence of these urban areas and new forms of entertainment. So many paintings, I mean, I'm sure you've maybe seen some looks like this before, just show the beauty of the cities, but at the same point, showing how some cases with all these new forms of entertainment, the speakeasies, the nightlife, it could get lonely at some times. All right, Georgia O'Keeffe captured the grandeur of New York using intensely colored canvases. So the skyline in many of these cities, as skyscrapers were emerging all across the United States in these larger urban areas. So just depicting what the cities look like. And for many people that lived in the rural areas, they're amazed by these looks. They're amazed by the skyscrapers and what these cities that were not too far away from them look like. And I'm sure many of you, when you travel to a larger area like Philadelphia, New York City, you're kind of amazed by uh, the different pace of life and what it actually looks like comparable to what we live right here in the rural areas. All right, Sinclair Lewis. So Sinclair Lewis was famous for the Babbitt, and the Babbitt just ridiculed the conformity of materialism and how our society is changing to a more materialistic society, where we're trying to look for the best new forms of, let's say, clothing or attire, or different types of forms of entertainment that just amuse us for a short time period, right? How we're transitioning and moving away from those family aspects that were so big in our lives before, and these fundamentalist households and these values that and traditions that we hold tight. Now we're changing more towards a materialistic lifestyle where we're looking for the most fanciest cars, we're looking for the fanciest clothing. Okay, we're listening to this music and enjoying ourselves for a short time out in the speakeasies, out in the nightclubs. And he ridiculed it. He said that we shouldn't be conforming to this new type of society and how this is altering many Americans' view of relationships, of family ties, of religious backgrounds. And overall, he thought that this change wasn't good for everybody. All right, so with the introduction of marketing, introduction of new businesses, and with material lifestyle, this was overall changing our dynamics as a culture, as a society. And for the most part, it wasn't always good, right? People were just spending their money on the materialistic lifestyle rather than actually spending it with their family. So again, another clash between fundamentalism and modernism. And the Babbitt explained a lot of this, conform to society and the materialistic lifestyle. All right, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Maybe you guys heard of the Great Gatsby before. And same thing. So F. Scott Fitzgerald talked a little bit about the jazz age and mentioned a lot in his book, The Great Gatsby, about how people were looking for this new luxury style of living, how they're getting together at these fancy bars and fancy nightclubs and these fancy balls where they would dance and get together with many popular figures of the time. Right, Noah?
Are we
Yeah.
gonna watch his movies?
The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
no.
come on, the Leonardo.
Toby Maguire.
DiCaprio.
Yeah, Toby Maguire's in it, isn't he?
I think they enjoy that
Yeah.
better than the silent film.
What do you mean? Charlie
I'm just
Chaplin's a good
saying,
film. We can't watch a movie every
Not
chapter.
even like flicks of. Just because.
You guys can look it up on your own. How about that? All right. So the Great Gatsby again is just talking about this materialistic lifestyle, talking about these fancy bars and fancy balls that people partook in the 1920s. And with this extra time on their hands, especially after World War One, and increased standard of living, people could afford many of these items. People could afford spending a lot of money on these fancy foods, wines, and dinners. And he kind of talked a little bit about the conformity of this society and conformity of these new tendencies in American society. And it wasn't really about it again. It isn't all about materialistic viewpoints. It's not all about going to the fanciest bars or fanciest nightclubs and balls and spending all this money. We're kind of losing our family traditions, our fundamentalist values. But The Great Gatsby reflected on emptiness of New York elite society. So it really wasn't all what it was cracked up to be. Even though they're going to this, like I said, and indulging in this new style of living and spending all this money for a short period of time at, let's say, a huge party or romantic party, it really didn't show that they had the values that they really were looking for. All right, I'm going to skip through this one. Ernest Hemingway. So Ernest Hemingway, he was a World War I veteran, and he was famous for writing about how the war really wasn't what it was cracked up to be. And last chapter, we talked about the effects of World War I, the new forms of technology that were included on the battlefield. And Hemingway talked like we shouldn't glorify it anymore. And a person that obviously experienced it was writing to really the main public that war has totally changed from what we know of it today, and that we shouldn't glorify it, that we shouldn't talk about it in a heroic sense, that it's terrible, and that we should reach all means to try to avoid war at all costs, especially with the new forms of technology that I explained already last chapter that were introduced on the battlefield with artillery, flamethrowers, chemical warfare. He saw the horrific side of war and wanted to make sure people were informed about warfare. So Hemingway, he mentioned a lot within his work about the terrible side of warfare and how this is something that we shouldn't look up to. We shouldn't glorify it. And we should seek all means to find peace and avoid another conflict like World War I, like the Great War. So many different forms of artwork were forming in the 1920s, and many of these writers explain their experiences in the new changing lifestyle in the urban areas. Maybe like Ernest Hemingway, his experiences in war with World War I, and really just the loneliness of society, how materialistic our society was going, how it was changing in the 1920s, and how this is, in many cases, our change of and losing our fundamentalist values, our traditional values. All right, is there any questions on writers of the 1920s? I know I went through a few of them here. We good? All right, okay. So I'll show you Steamboat Willie now. Hopefully you guys enjoy that.